We're live. Welcome back, everybody. My name is David Whitmore. I'm the co-host. The other co-host right here is Joseph Whitmore. This is a podcast about Henry VIII. A couple disclosures up front. We're not real historians. We're not comedians, although we think we're funny sometimes. And this is a unrehearsed conversation, but I think it's going to be really entertaining. So if you like it, hit like and consider subscribing or supporting us on Patreon. So we're going to talk about Henry VIII, and I've kind of despised Henry VIII since I was a young child, and here's part of the reason. That was Herman Hermits. So I've always, like, just from what I know about him, it's just like, he's just like an awful person. But over the last year, and especially over the last week, that I've kind of opened lifted the hood and kind of took a look at Henry VIII, and he's actually done some awesome things. And he was a pretty cool person, and we've got about 6 or 7 bullet points that we're going to make sure that we cover. But you know, he worked with his ministers to improve the government, but at the same time somehow made himself even more powerful, even though he gave more power to the parliament. But after all that, after kind of a year of looking into it and about a week of kind of more in-depth study, I've come to the conclusion that he was the biggest piece of crap in history. He was. He was. And we'll talk about why. But first, to get going, he was born in 1491. That's a great date. He dies in 1547 at the age of 56. He was king from 1509 to 1547. So he was 38 years as the king. Everybody knows about his 6 wives. He only killed 2 of them. So, you know, there is that. I want to go over them just real quick, and we'll go in more detail later. So Catherine of Aragon was the first wife. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. I think she might have been the granddaughter, actually. And he was married to her for a long time, for like the first 20 years. And those first 20 years, well, those were the best years. Henry VIII was into music, he was into literature, he was writing stuff, he was dancing, he was jousting, he was wrestling, he was a theologian. He was just on top of his game when he was with Catherine of Aragon. But he divorced her because they weren't able to have a son, primarily. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, he executed her silly butt. And primarily, I think it was because he had a male son and died in childbirth. That was probably the real reason. So that was number 2. Number 3 was Jane Seymour. She died in childbirth. They did have a girl. Number 4 was Anne of Cleves. He just divorced her ugly ass because she was too ugly. Number 5 was Catherine Howard. He likes these Catherines. She got executed, though, because she was too damn flirtatious. And number 6 was another Catherine, the third Catherine, Catherine Parr, and Catherine outlived Henry. Now, I said earlier that he improved the government. He relied on these 2 ministers, Cardinal Wolsey and Cromwell, because they were brilliant. He also had them executed along with a bunch of other people. So now we're going to talk about how great he was. This guy, I don't know. The war with France where can we start with Henry VIII? He's like the picture. If you look up king, you see like a picture of Henry VIII, all fat and bloated, like a bloated hyena. That's the picture that we get from him. But yet, there's songs that are still sung that he supposedly wrote. What is it with him? I don't get it. Maybe we should go back to the Plantagenets. You know,
Yeah.
after Eleanor and Henry IV, because the Plantagenets were so bad.
Yeah, the blood is still running through his veins. Yeah, so after, actually, I mean, it goes back all the way to the 1066, the invasion with, you know, and when the French took over England, and then, you know, the Plantagenets was sort of an offshoot of that activity of the French. They were a branch, and that went on, and then they broke up into two families called the Tudors. I mean, the Lancastrians and
Yorks.
Oh my God.
The
Yorks and the
Lancastrians,
Yeah, the Yorks, right. And then they had a war to see who was going to be king. And
yeah, so in that battle, it's called the Battle of the Roses. Everybody knows about it. Lancasters and the Yorks, they finally came to blows in the Battle of the Roses, as you had written here. Let's talk about that. The Battle of the Roses. What the hell kind of name is that? It's the gayest sounding war. It's like War of the Dandelions. How about War of the Fluffy Pillows? What the fuck? They can't even name their wars.
It wasn't even called that. That's the name some wimpy historian gave it hundreds of years later to give them a break, right? It was some historian that was like the Lancastrian was in a garden with his nemesis, and they were picking roses, and one was picking red roses, and one was picking white roses, and historian caught on that. And then Shakespeare took it up, and so we can blame this whole War of the Roses name on Shakespeare for popularizing this.
Yeah, but they did love their roses.
But
they would have in their coat of arms and all that.
Yeah, I think it was in their coat of arms. They had like a rose, right, with a sword through the rose or something. But,
red rose and a yellow rose.
Yeah, and then, but it wasn't. They didn't call it. Well, let's start the War of the Roses. Or they get together before the war and says, "What are we going to call this war? Why don't we call it the war between the Yorks and the Lancastrians?" And too long. War of the Roses. Everybody's going to remember
That's
that.
funny.
Yeah.
Actually, they should name a war before they start it. Let's call this war we're going to start X.
Yeah, exactly.
The Tudors won the Battle of Bosworth Field.
Yeah,
and that set up Henry VIII's father. So Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, right? So, but what was great for Henry VIII is his mother was Lancastrian. He married a Yorkster, so he brought the two houses together, and everything was great. And Henry VI was a interesting king. Well, actually, he was not interesting. He was duller than dull, but he was good. He got the treasury. He got money in the coffers for Henry VIII to have fun with. But like I said earlier, those first 20 years, it's like a different person. Henry was a celebrity. They called him Hal. Hal.
Yeah.
And he was just like so popular. And here's what I think, and I don't even think it's like any kind of weird conspiracy theory. I think it's pretty much a fact. So, because he was super athletic, but was he really that athletic? Because he lost that wrestling match to Francis I. We could talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so I think what happened was he definitely got injured with his leg jousting, but he also got thrown from a horse. And I think that created traumatic brain injury, TMI, because after that hardcore fall from the jousting accident, he like woke up from that and just became the Dr. Jekyll from Mr. Hyde. He was all of a sudden like way super paranoid, way super vindictive. And then once he started executing people and he found out he could sleep afterwards, he had no problem going forward executing anybody. So I really think that fall off the horse changed Henry from this, music loving, jousting, wrestling theologian to he was still smart because he's still focused on his theologian part. But yeah, I don't know. I think he just turned evil.
That's a good theory. I never heard that before. Maybe the real historians can take us up on this and follow up. But to be truthful, he was like his father was the cost accountant king, who got England back together again after all of the Roses stopped fighting each other. He put a lot of money into the coffers. So, and Henry inherited when he was 17, right? He was only a 17-year-old when he came to the throne. And he married Catherine of Aragon right after that, who was the previous wife of his brother who died, right? And that was his out later when he didn't want to be married to her anymore. But he killed some of the cost accountants of his father in order
right off the bat.
Right off the bat, he was killing people without any remorse. Maybe not to the extent he was going to do it later. Nobody survived his as what we would call a prime minister now. Nobody survived around him for very long. He ended up killing everybody, not just his wives. But he did have all that money in the beginning, and he did have, and he wasn't that interested. For him, he was he was 17, right? He was very athletic. Maybe not the best athlete in the world, but he had a lot of energy for sure, and he liked to ride. And war for him was sport, right? He loved going to war, just like, we would like to get up in the morning and go play baseball or play tennis. And he did play tennis, by the way. But he saw no distinction between tennis and war, right? It's just something else to do. He actually wanted to restart the 100 Years' War. He didn't like the way that ended, right? So he wanted to get that. He wanted to get that going again. I go, Joan of Arc.
The 200-year war.
The 200-year war. It's like, we got beat by Joan of Arc. Are you friggin' kidding me? So he actually got the Pope to christen him King of France, right? Of course, that was Pope Paul or something. Not Pope Leo or some other pope. It was Pope Paul, who was trying to build the Sistine Chapel or something. So he needed money, he needed support. But the French didn't appreciate it, so that started a war with France. And the Pope said, if you conquer France, I'll come to Paris and crown you. And Henry's going, yeah, sure, I'll meet you in Paris. Never got there. But he did. He started wars with everybody. He started wars with France. He tried to start wars with Spain. He started to start wars with the Holy Roman Empire, with Scotland, Ireland. There wasn't a country within his reach he didn't have a war with. And for him, it was sport, along with tennis and hunting. He loved to hunt, and go out and kill innocent animals for fun. So that was Henry. But he had a boundless amount of energy, right, and young. And he did take risks. He's not like he had wars and let other people do it. It was sport. He was out there with them. So he was brave and he was intelligent, at least when he was young, and he was athletic. But I think the horse being going to all of these jousts, then getting knocked out. Once he almost had his eye taken out in one of these jousts. He forgot to put down his friggin' visor. Mm-hmm. For God's sake. That would be one of the things you should make a habit if you're jousting. By the way, this is just my tip to other people out there.
That a jousting?
Jousting.
I've never known a jouster. because I've known people that went to Renaissance fairs, but I've never met any of
A
modern day.
jouster.
They do. They have
Gotcha.
modern day jousters at the Renaissance fair,
Well, I tell
don't
you, put
they?
your visor down. Put your visor down. But and then the next one he did, he got hit in the leg, which that's the one who like knocked him off his horse and laid him up for a week. And yet you said he was never the same afterwards. And that wound never healed, so it was always like pussy and gross, and always like smelled. It was a nasty thing to have to be around. The thing is, he didn't moderate his appetites. He kept eating, just like we do, right?
Yeah.
After we stop being young, we keep up the same appetites, and he couldn't be an athlete anymore. He could hardly walk, right? After that, he had to walk with a cane when he could walk at all, and he was always laid up, and he kept eating and eating and eating, and then and he got syphilis, and he got gout, and he just became a disgusting blob of a man, which was pretty sad. But he never, unlike Charles V, who Charles V always doubted himself, right? You never got the sense that Charles actually, God, well, because he was taught by the Grand Inquisitor, for God's sake, right? So he's got this super guilty conscience about everything. Henry didn't have that problem.
Right.
Henry never doubted himself, right? It was always Henry first. It was almost like a narcissism,
Oh, absolutely.
Charles V was not a narcissist, for sure. He failed in a lot of ways, but he failed, and he knew he was failing even when he was failing. Henry VIII never believed even when he changed his mind about religion, right? He went from Catholicism to Protestantism almost on a weekly basis, and he never considered that anything was a mistake. He had no doubt about whatever decision he made. So very different characters. So yeah, I think there is a change. Yeah, he's a narcissist. After the fall from his little jousting accident, I think that changed everything, and that was about the time also that he realized that he married a woman 5 years older than him, right?
Yeah.
And so Catherine's like 40, right, or something, and he's like getting to be middle age, and then there's little Anne Boleyn bouncing around, and he needed. I mean, it's funny because after that, two of his daughters, and one of his daughters, Elizabeth, right, actually became queen, and one of the most famous queens of all time. But he didn't believe women could inherit the throne.
Right.
So if he didn't get a male heir, he was going to be number 2 Tudor and number 2 Tudor the last. So and Anne Boleyn was a Protestant, so it kind of worked out. But and during his early reign, he had who was the guy you just mentioned his name?
Well, the first one was
Wolsey.
Yeah. And Wolsey was brilliant. Wolsey was really good.
Yeah, he was a fat slob too, though.
But what I'm still feel confident about, because it fits the profile of a narcissist, and clearly Henry VIII was a freaking biggest textbook example of a narcissist. But Wolsey was his yes man and ran the government, ended up taking a third of the entire government's money. So like say, whatever the total revenue of the government was, he ended up with a third of it. So that was crazy to do. So Henry VIII got tired of that and had him executed.
Well, yeah, I think as long as Wolsey was doing stuff that was helping Henry, he gave Wolsey a free hand.
Yeah, but Henry had to take credit for everything. Yeah, Henry had anything that was good, it was him, and especially with Cromwell. Cromwell's even more brilliant than Wolsey, I think. The way
Cromwell, he was fine.
They enacted these series of laws that were brilliant because they increased the power of the sovereign, Henry VIII, and anything everything had to go through Cromwell, so it increased his importance, but it also increased the importance of the Parliament. So the Parliament was tasked with all the money and everything now. So it was a good thing, and was, a great foundation for later on when there wasn't tyrants that could veto anything they freaking wanted. It was a good foundation.
Yeah, Henry gave through Cromwell, right? I mean, the Parliament sort of came into its own. Well, it didn't come into its own, but he created structure there that would be the foundation of the Parliament.
And they started taking care
of
the poor.
Yeah, well, they had the poor laws because they got rid of the Catholic Church. Who used to take care of the poor people. Right. So
that was crazy what they did to the church and the monasteries.
Yeah. So, to get back to the first few years of Henry, when he was 17, to the point where he fell off his horse, he was spending his father's money, right, on all these wars and all these hunting expeditions, all these castles and stuff, and a lot of that money ended up going to Wolsey. But by the time he fell off the horse, that money was gone, right? And he didn't win any of the wars, right? The wars were over, and his navy wasn't doing anything, and he had no more money. And all these monasteries had a lot of money. They've been accumulating money for the past 1,000 years, right? So all he has to do, he's not the only one. That's what the German princes in, during Luther's time, right? They go, oh, we don't have to follow the Pope. The Pope's wrong. That means we can take all this money from all these monasteries. So all these kings and emperors and princes in the Roman Empire, in the Holy Roman Empire, realized they were sitting on a treasure chest of money of all these monasteries and churches and idols that were made of gold. They could burn them down and take them. So, and I think that's what Cromwell told them. Look at this. You got to shut down all these monasteries, take their money, and he did. Took their land, and he ended up. Unfortunately, he ended up taking all that money and using it on more wars with France, Francis the First. So he ended up with nothing, no monasteries, no land. As a matter of fact, what they don't understand, I guess until Adam Smith, later, was that they didn't understand economics. He thinks if you take all of this land from the monasteries and put it on the market at once, you're going to get the monetary value you had when they were still held by the monasteries, right? But if you flood the market with land, it's not worth anything, right? So he's not getting nearly as much as he thought he was, and he's selling it off to these to anybody who has money. So
the aristocracy was able to increase their power too, because they had all this land that was available that was dirt cheap. So he didn't plan to, but he increased the power of the aristocracy. He increased the power of the Parliament on accident. He did both of those things on accident. And I gotta diss on Hal a little bit more, because we're talking about him like he shouldn't have been his freaking head cut off. So yeah, he did start what became the world's best Navy. He put money into the Navy. These wars that he was started, not mostly with France, but the other ones too, he's the one who started them. And then when they were over, nothing was happened, and he had a great victory, celebration. It was his own problem that he solved and became the hero of it, after he had taken credit for everything that Wolsey and Cromwell did. That's why I think, and plus this narcissistic, fat, and you could imagine as he got bigger, his face got bigger and his eyes stayed the same. So his eyes just became this small, and his mouth small, and just this giant head of he's just a demon. And I don't care how smart he was, how eloquent that he was, made the Pope seem silly, made the Pope contradict himself. All this, woo, I won a little Twitter war. He was an awful person. just the worst.
I think Luther got the better of him in the Twitter wars.
Oh, sure he did. Because Henry VIII, the stuff that he wrote, I don't even think he wrote anything. I think he took credit for somebody else writing everything. I think with all the stuff he had going on with him, aside from the traumatic brain injury and the gout and the syphilis, I think that he also had diabetes.
Well, yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
You know, so he was just
all that sugar from the New World, along with all the gold, right?
So he was just this massive miserableness, and his mind kept working. Paranoid.
Yeah,
So I don't like the fact that we honor him in any way. I can see it's been 500 years, and I can see he's done great things, but I think we should put him now in the same class as Stalin. Okay, maybe not.
Maybe not Stalin. Maybe not Stalin.
But yeah. Okay, no, I know where he goes. Yeah. He goes right above, or maybe equal to, you know, the King John from Robin Hood, because that guy, he started Magna Carta, whatever, or the other guy did, but that was even longer ago. So we can give them more lenient. We can give them, you know, a little bit more lenience. But I don't know, Henry VIII and this whole, and I started hating Henry VIII with Herman Hermits. That song is awful. That was my point in the beginning. I was like 7 years old. I heard that song and I was like, that's a piece of crap song. And then you learn about him killing his wives. And it's like, why isn't this guy like the synonym of, like, you know, like today we say, oh my God, yeah, that's what the Nazis did. We should be saying, well, that's what Henry VIII would have done. That's how I feel about him.
Yeah.
Okay, compared to his contemporaries, especially compared to his contemporaries. Charles V, way better. Francis I, way better. Suleiman the Magnificent, 100 times better. The only person he was better than was Clement I, because that was useless. He every time he switched sides, it was to the wrong side. It was like, did someone hit him on the head? I think he fell off a horse.
Probably at one time, yeah. Before that, it was Leo. So yeah, he wasn't an admirable man. And the people who make meaningful contributions are assholes in themselves, and that was Wolsey. Not so much. He was just doing Henry's dirty work and getting paid for it, and it let Henry have a childhood, right? I mean, just, you know, Wolsey just keep handing me out money, support my wars, and I'll leave you alone, until he couldn't get the divorce, until Wolsey couldn't arrange the divorce, and then he got killed. He got executed, and then Cromwell come along. Thomas More got executed too, but Cromwell was the one who was more of the evil accountant. I mean, he was the first one who said all these public ministries had to have a budget that was submitted to the king. They had to tell the king how much money they had and how much money they were using.
That was a great idea. Why not?
That was a great idea. Like, why didn't they decide that? Like, you know.
I think they were doing that in Italy already. They kind of
in Italy, I think they had the double digit bookkeeping, but at least
the greatest part about the story, I think, is that, because I love karma, and karma gets everybody in the end. Of course, karma tore the hell out of Henry VIII, and he died at 56, but just with his health alone. But the karma for Cromwell was especially poignant because, he did all this. He was a pluralist in terms of his jobs, because he was the king and a minister of this and that, blah, 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 blah. But the one thing he couldn't do, one thing he sucked at, was being a matchmaker. So Anne of Cleves.
Oh yeah, Anne of Cleves, yeah.
So Henry needs a wife because Jane Seymour died in childbirth, and then Cromwell's all, yes, now I get to play diplomatic matchmaker, and I'll find this German princess, and we'll get an alliance going with the German states. It'll be brilliant. And he finds the perfect girl, and he has one of the famous portraitists go and draw a picture of her. And here's what we don't know for sure. Henry VIII didn't. We know this for sure. Henry VIII thought she was god awful ugly, and that she smelled, and that he never consummated the marriage so he could get out of it. But perhaps Anne of Cleves was terrified. She's like, I'm not going to marry this freaking wife killer. So she probably didn't bathe for a month and made herself look ugly as hell. That's my theory.
I've heard that. I've heard that theory before too, right?
That makes more sense.
By this point, he was a bulky, syphilitic, gouty, obese, sweating man with this wound that still hadn't healed and was oozing, and he was in pain all the time.
But that was the end of Cromwell.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that was the end of Cromwell. But actually, Anne of Cleves did pretty well. I mean, they never consummated the marriage, so technically, she just got to retire into her own little estate in the country with a good pension. So she lived out the rest of her life. But she always had to make sure she was ugly when Henry showed up, right?
That's right.
I'm sure she cleaned up after she was out of airside of him. He goes, give me a bath, do my hair, give me some clothes.
I wonder if her and Catherine of Aragon ever hung out, because Catherine of Aragon didn't get executed. They just got divorced, so she was still alive.
Annulled, technically.
Annulled. Yeah, so I bet you probably. Catherine and Anne of Cleves were hanging
war
out.
Stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were both Catholics too, right? So maybe they did. That would be a novel, huh? Catherine. Yeah. No, I think Catherine died about the same time as Anne Boleyn. So but they may have met before that. So who knows?
But I think it's important.
They were roughly contemporaries.
I think it's important to point out that Henry didn't kill Catherine of Aragon, didn't have her executed, and he didn't.
Well, she was first of all, she was the daughter of the Holy Roman Empire. I don't think you want to piss off the Holy, even if you're Henry VIII. And she was the sister of the Holy Roman Empire, and she was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. So she was well connected, and she was loved by the people.
Right.
So
she
I don't
truly
think
was.
Really had.
But you know what though? I know, but Henry is not the most rational guy. So let's give him credit there. Okay, he didn't. I'm trying to find some positives about it. He didn't kill Catherine of Aragon. He didn't kill Anne of Cleves. And Catherine
that was your excuse for Charles V. He didn't kill the Pope when he was in jail. Yeah, you get pretty low standards. You could imprison your wife, but you can't kill
I was
her.
thinking about that because, that was a silly thing to say. But it's amazing it got to that point because it was the Lutherans who sacked Rome. And if they thought that the Pope was the Antichrist, it's lucky Charles even got a chance to take him in prison. It's lucky the Lutherans didn't just put him on a stake.
It's true, but remember the reason the Lutherans sacked Rome is because Charles V was broke.
Paying them.
And he was broke and he hadn't paid him yet. So I'm sure if he actually killed the Pope, they might never get paid. So they were probably holding the Pope for ransom too. So there may have been like a double cross going on about. But that was Clement VII, and he was the big pawn in this whole thing. That whole thing came up in a Dan Brown novel too. I think Angels and Demons. They had something to do with it.
But you know what? Here's my saving grace, because we can look at Henry VIII as however we want to look at him. But you know what? Today, you and I this morning, as well as like most people in America, we live in a life that Henry VIII's decadence could have never dreamed of. We wake up every morning. We have refrigerated air. We have a refrigerator. We have electricity. So, screw this fat guy from the 1500s. I think he truly, after his TBI, was the worst king. I really do. But you know what? I think it's great because, we live better than he did, or could have ever
Yeah.
imagined.
So I think, and it's like his father, Henry VII. Anybody, I mean, who wants to watch a movie on Henry VII, right? Everybody wants to watch movies on Henry VIII, right? But Henry VII, you can, you read about him and you say, yeah, that's a medieval king, right? You know, Henry VIII, I think that's the first modern king, right? I mean, he had he was setting the foundation for modern England with the Stuarts and
right, because there was
Stuarts.
a population. The population was really growing dramatically during Henry's time, and from the transition from Henry's father, Henry the Seventh, it was like dawn of a new world. There was so many more people. That's why it was the beginning of the first welfare state, because they did have the poor tax for people. And there was a lot of people that were unemployed.
Yeah, but it didn't go to the what they call the sturdy beggars, because again,
right.
they didn't understand economic theory, right?
Yeah.
That one of the things all the lords they found out wool was more profitable than crops, so they so they had all these lands that their peasants had been literally farming on for like thousands of years, and they just enclosed all this land and put sheep on them, and all of these peasants that have been there for 1,000 years are gone with they didn't get what they called it in they didn't get any money for it, they didn't get any golden parachute, they were just out, and there was nowhere to go, so they got to the city. You go, where are we going to go? Our land is gone because they enclosed it. And they says, well, you should go to work. I go, well, okay, give me a job.
Yeah.
There was no jobs, right? But they literally did. So they really thought that these sturdy beggars were just being slothful, and there was no church. Remember, they got rid of that whole infrastructure where no matter. That's one thing good about the Catholic Church, right? I mean, since the Protestants don't believe in good works, right? It's all faith, right? So you have faith. If you see a poor person, you go, he's a beggar, fuck him, right? Where if you're a Catholic during that time, that's part of your job is to give money and to help them. It's written into their creed. So anybody's poor, you as a Catholic have got to give him money and support him and help him and give him medical care. Protestants, not so much.
Yeah, and that's still. There's a lot of going on today with Catholic charities and whatnot, but I think it's important to give them at least a partial credit on the fact that
a C plus.
They understood there was a problem, and they did try to address it. They had enclosure laws that they tried to address stuff with because the Parliament had to do something. But nothing worked good. But at least they began to have an ecosystem that would allow things to try things.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. They started out. This was the first time. Well, first the bad part of the good part of the Catholic Church at that time is it was their duty to help the poor and the humble, and there were all these like missionary stuff to help the people. On the other hand, you went right up to the Pope, so you could supersede any king that was there, right? If you had a problem, you could go to a church court instead of an English court, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of mixed. Yeah. So I think in that sense, Cromwell made the First Nation state of saying he closed off the borders. He said, this is England, that's not England, and this is and everybody reports to the king. You don't report to the Pope. The Pope is not in the equation. So, which is funny because I think Henry VIII really liked Catholicism. I mean,
he did.
He liked the Mass. He liked the churches. He just didn't like the Pope.
That's the other thing that I just makes me irritated with Henry VIII, because he was so weird like that. Like his big thing, he was like a theologian. He knew a crap load about the Bible and studied this, that, and the other. And his big thing was, one thing that he never did change his mind on. He believed that the Holy Communion, it really was the body and blood of Jesus. It got transformed. And he believed that.
Transubstantiation.
Yeah. And he believed that. And that was like that was like the only thing that he cared about. Everything else he would switch back and forth. He was really like this. He didn't like that. But that was just a crazy thing to be hung up on. It's like, oh, geez, Henry. That's just crazy. He was just crazy. And the other thing that was crazy was, he had 60 residences, and he moved his court, which had about 400 people, throughout these 60 residences, just constantly. It was crazy. He had to keep moving. Like, I'm thinking, did they say it was because they needed cleaning after that many people had been there? But I think it was all the ghosts that kept chasing him from one residence to another. And that's how I think
like a Winchester, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think his to go on just a little bit. So Edward was his son, and he was a Protestant. He was a total Protestant. I think he was the son of Jane Seymour, who was a Protestant, and he went totally Protestant on England. And
because he was raised as a total Protestant. He had no
He
choice.
was raised as a total Protestant. Yeah, which was funny. I mean, at that time, even in some countries today, I mean, you couldn't have two religions in one country. It's like it was either going to be Catholic or it was going to be Protestant. The idea of pluralism was just beyond their comprehension, right? If the king believes in transubstantiation, not believing in transubstantiation was not only heresy, it was against the law, right? It was treason to not believe in transubstantiation, right? So what was that series of novels by Sanson? Do you remember about the time of Henry VIII?
Shardlake novels.
The Shardlake novels, right? I would advise everybody to go read the Shardlake novels, because it's about this lawyer who lives through Henry VIII's reign, and it's quite amusing.
Oh, that's probably why I hate Henry VIII, because Shardlake poisoned me with those novels, because Henry VIII was not he was not the hero of those novels. But so Shardlake is awesome.
Read the Shardlake novels, and there's a Netflix on. I think it's on the Tudors, but I think all they ever got to was Henry VIII. It's awful, but
Netflix is awful because it's like the young Henry. Maybe it's like
it's the young Henry, and I was thinking, well, when's he gonna get fat and gouty and syphilitic? And he never does in the movie. He stays young throughout the whole thing. And I go, that's not true. So, but the first couple episodes through Anne Boleyn, I think, are good. I really like Anne Boleyn and Catherine, but after that, it's not believable anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Anne Boleyn is a great story. It's funny is I don't think that either Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard were stupid enough to have an affair, but they weren't smart enough to realize they shouldn't flirt, which was equivalent. Because if somebody's that insecure about everything, he's going to be really insecure about that. But anyway, so his children continued the bipolar religious stuff, because the son was Protestant, but he dies. Then the daughter of Catherine,
Bloody Mary, yeah.
Mary becomes the Catholic,
the queen, and she drags everybody back to Catholicism.
Yeah, so this was
and kills, and they call it. Yeah, it was like Well, that was the time of religion. That was, the time, or coming up on the time of the 30 Years' War, the wars of religion in France. I mean, in the 30 Years' War, the Protestant and Catholics destroyed 50% of the people in what would become Germany. I mean, can you imagine that, fighting over transubstantiation? I mean, the stuff we would just think is like crazy now is like they were killing each other over. And since they were heretics, I mean, they were a lot more mean to other, well, they didn't consider them, they considered them heretics, but they were a lot more vicious to other Christians than they were to like Muslims. And Muslims, you just kill them, right? Yeah, there's nothing's on the line, right? But a Lutheran and a Catholic, it's like that's just touching too close to home, and they were really vicious. And they had the same where we talked about that once about the French and with the Bartholomew's Days massacre. Maybe we'll take that one up again sometime. So it wasn't a good time. Oh, but the funniest one, I think, that I thought about this in high school. They taught us about the prayer book revolution. It's like they were killing each other over. They were killing each other over friggin' two groups of Catholics were killing each other over friggin' prayer books. I mean, what's the hypocrisy in that? I mean, that's just amazing.
I think that sounds about right. A battle over a prayer book, a war of the dandelions. They might as well call it that. I think historians aren't great at picking names, but anyway, we probably should end this. So we do appreciate everybody, for listening. And like I said, if you find that a little bit entertaining, go ahead and hit that like button. And is there anything else you wanted to say, or just we'll be back next week? I guess that's it.
I think so. This time, this time I think what we're trying to do is take on the early 16th century when 20-somethings ruled Europe. We took Charles V, now Henry, and then maybe we'll do one on Francis, one on Suleiman, maybe one on the friggin' popes, and then we can do one on Luther.
I think that we should wade into the Suleiman and see if we can do him justice, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I think the other thing to note is that all of these four rulers got to the throne because somebody else died, right? None of them were being prepped for their day in the sun, and they all got it, which is kind of understandable, I guess, at the time. And they all died young, except for Suleiman. Well, young relative. If you're listening to this when you're 20, you may not think 58 is young.
I think that Suleiman the Magnificent is going to be different from us, because at the end of the day, I know you and I aren't like Christians, but we come from a Christian background, and we understand it, and we can talk shit about it. As we wade into the Ottoman Empire and we start talking about Islam, I think I'm at a really big disadvantage. Maybe you aren't as bad, because I don't know that much about it. I mean, and I don't know how far we want to go into it, but I think if we just stick to the historical facts, it should be fine, because Suleiman the Magnificent just was amazing.
The background, I mean, we don't know anything about it.
I don't know anything about Islam, especially I don't know anything about Islam in the 1500s, as opposed to...
Except for they were beating the shit out of the Christians.
Yeah, well, actually, that's true. I probably don't know that much about it.
Right?
Yeah, and the reality is I probably don't know that much about Christianity either, especially from the 1500s. What difference does it make? That's why the hell with it.
It was killing each other over a host.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody.
So you want to do Francis next time, or Suleiman? I think we should do Francis. He may be a little easier.
Okay. We'll do Francis.
I think we gotta build up to Suleiman.
Okay.
We'll build the background.
Francis will be pretty good. Francis.
Yeah.
Kicked Henry VIII's ass in wrestling at the field of cloth.
We have to.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll
we
get to
gotta
that one with Francis.
Yeah, when they
All
were
right.
both like 21. Okay. Talk to you later.
Thank you, everybody.